Dear students, welcome to ePathshala. I am Dr. Rakesh Thakur, Associate Professor teaching Sociology at Postgraduate Government College Sector 11, Chandigarh. Today's module is Globalization and its impact on region. In today's module, we will try to understand the concept of globalization. Once we have understood, we would also try and define the concept of region, and then we would try to make an relationship, examine the interlinkages between globalization and regions. We would talk about different regions of the world and see, because of the effect of globalization, how regionalization has come into being. So let's begin the lesson by understanding the concept of globalization. In this module, we would try and understand the concept of globalization, to define the concept of region and analyze the impact of globalization on region, and to study the rise of regionalization. Globalization is a process which has accelerated the flow of ideas, information, goods and services between various countries. The first wave of globalization is traced to the late 1800 and early 1900, when trade among various countries grew rapidly and lots of investment was made across countries. The second wave of globalization is traced to 1950s and 1960s, when lot of developed countries did away with regulation policies and went ahead with open trade with different countries around the globe. The third wave of globalization came with the adoption of deregulation policies by developing countries. But as the process of globalization progressed, it is seen that it is not only an economic activity but has repercussions in other spheres also, like the political sphere, the cultural sphere, so on and so forth. Undoubtedly, globalization has affected regions. South says that globalization is inescapable and unavoidable phenomena which directly impacts regions. Let's further understand what does he mean. But before we do that, it would be nice to understand the concept of region. Region is an area which is generally marked separately from other areas on the basis of any of the characteristics of a particular area. Regions can be classified mainly on the basis of physical and cultural conditions. Regions are generally interdependent entities which function as integral part of continuously changing and interacting networks. Regions provide their resident with a local identity and social and cultural roots. Thus, regions are not merely geographical entity but has so much more to it. Now that we understood what do we mean when we say region, let's try to understand how globalization has affected region. Though globalization is affecting everything, but the economic aspect of globalization seem to have affected regions the most. Prior to globalization, let's try and understand how regions have been affected the most. Prior to globalization, the trading agreements used to be signed between 2 or 3 countries. But with globalization, competition has increased in field of economic activities, and hence now countries try to negotiate agreements at global level or with many countries at the same time. Globalization is making some regions more vulnerable to external misfortunes and economic restructuring as they face problems like lack of national and international investment, immigration, brain drain, geographical isolation, etc. Let's understand the phenomena of regionalization and how it has spread across the world. Globalization has promoted the concept of regional integration or regionalization. It has led to creation of various regions primarily on the basis of favorable trading conditions. Though the two seem to be contradictory, as globalization aims at integrating the whole world, while regionalization is formation of groups of sub-country, but intense competition unleashed by globalization has made the countries to look for safe havens and to trade with them. Zepka says regionalization is a long-term process of integrating the economies of certain country and the region by intensifying and deepening their economic relations, which leads to the formation of highly interdependent regional system. Though regionalization is counted as one of the impacts of globalization, however, at the same time, it can be seen as a step towards globalization. Some economists see this regionalization as good as these are trade creating, that is, countries in a particular region remove impediments to trade and invest smoothly and efficiently. But at the same time, some economists see this as a bad, as these regions are trade diverting, that is, the country in a region completely exclude other countries from trade activities. GATT, that is, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, was set up in 1947 after the World War II by the United States, and it became one of the most important multilateral trade arrangements. The GATT turned into World Trade Organization in 1995 with few countries, but at the present, World Trade Organization or WTO has more than 140 member countries. Another important such formation which eases economic activity among some countries is the formation of European Economic Council in 1958. Now, this formation is known as European Union, consisting of 27 European nations. However, not every country is finding it beneficial to sign a trade agreement through WTO. Some of the countries have signed agreement outside the purview of WTO. One such agreement is North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, signed between United States of America, Canada, and Mexico. Though signing of these agreements are good for trading activity, but sometimes these treaties create different regions of trade which become inclusive in themselves, cutting off from other countries. Irwin says that the critiques of regionalization, and I quote, suggest that these approaches may undermine and supplant instead of support and complement the multilateral WTO approach, which is to be preferred for operating globally on a non-discriminatory basis. Even the Asian countries which are developing have formed their associations. For instance, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand formed the Association of Southeast Asian Nation, that is ASEAN, in 1967. The South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, was formed by Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka in 1985. Owing to the intensification of globalization in the present time, the development regionalization is also changing. Zepka says that a new regionalization has emerged which not only aims at economic cooperation but also political, social, and cultural cooperation. Oman hence says that regionalization due to globalization has raised two closely related questions. The question number one is, to the major regional integration agreement, notably Europe Single Market Program and North American Free Trade Agreement NAFTA, tend to balance between trade creating or trade diverting. The second question that poses before us is, do these regional agreements tend to work for or against a more open world trading system which globalization aims to create? Discussing further, the author says that the answer to these questions remain inconclusive. To conclude, let's understand what are the major contours that we need to discuss in the end. It is good that globalization is providing countries with new opportunities to trade and raise the standard of living of its people. Undoubtedly, that the standard of living has improved cannot be questioned. Even if you would look at our own country, the influx in automobile sector, in media houses, in the quality of life, in infrastructure like roads and apartment, all these are a byproduct of goods, material, new technologies coming to our country through globalization. But is this goodness spread evenly across our country? Or is it situated only in certain pockets? Are we becoming as a country islands of prosperity and other regions are decaying and disintegrating in more than one ways? So, one has to understand that globalization is affecting different regions in different way. It is proving disadvantageous for some reason, whereas advantageous for some another. At an international context, I would like to point out, we do not only have the division between the first world country, which we call as developed nation, and third world countries, which we call as developing nation, but nations which are always ready with their begging bowl. Had it not been for international aid agencies, the people in those countries would find it difficult to survive. Yes, I'm talking about fourth world countries. But these two sides of good and bad can be balanced by adopting some policies and conditions. Zepka says, and I quote, "Economic changes and the development of competition in the regions may be perceived as an important step of adjustment and of preparation of the economies of countries and regions to an increasing competition in the global market." What I want to emphasize is that globalization is not uniform even within a country and across the world. Now, let me quote Boutier. He says, "It is a key that the European Union enlargement process be outward looking and inclusive instead of inward looking and exclusive. In the field of trade, care must be taken to ensure that the enlarged European Union is trade creating," I emphasize trade creating, "for the world as a whole, rather than trade diverting. I again emphasize trade diverting for the world as a whole. The onus is that let us not be trade diverting at the expense of the countries left outside the enlarged Union. European Union should not corner all the trade, but should be somebody which should facilitate more trade opportunities, especially to those parts of the world which have seen a dip in the trade. Another issue which becomes very, very important for us to address out here is the preservation of the local identity and the social and cultural ethos of a particular region. You must have heard on television, read in newspapers, and it is widely debated in the society that how there is lot of clash that is happening over the issue of a local identity. What exactly constitutes a local identity? What are the social and cultural ethos of a particular region, and why they are feeling threatened under the process of globalization? It is very, very important that sensitiveness should be prevailing while understanding the process of globalization. Economic well-being should not lead to an erosion of cultural values. It should not lead to an homogenization of universal identities. The cultural ethos, the social ethos of a particular region should not be lost. The diversity should be maintained. It should not give rise to a larger loss, thus reducing the rich diversity existing in the world. The richness of diversity should be celebrated. It should be maintained. Through the process of globalization, these many cultures should spread across the world and not lose focus in the world. In the end, I would like to conclude and say globalization and its impact on region should be harmonizing. It should be propelling an underdeveloped region to a developed one while maintaining its cultural identity and impact. In today's lesson, we understood how the process of globalization affects different parts of the world, how there are certain regions in the world like the United States of America, the countries coming under European Union, and the other first world countries which have benefited a lot under globalization, whereas there are regions which are still pockets of underdevelopment. And we also undersaw the process of regionalization. We also saw that how development is not only about economic progress, but people also care about their cultural ethos, their identity. So I hope that you had a conceptual clarity about regionalization and the way globalization affects different regions of the world. Thank you.